The scent of pine and dust filled the cold Montana air as Rose Nowak clutched her 6-month-old daughter Emma closer to her chest, the last train whistle of the evening echoing through the empty Pine Ridge station. With nowhere to go and night falling fast over the rugged landscape, she fought back tears while scanning the deserted platform for any sign of the cousin who had promised to meet her. A promise now clearly broken. Rose had traveled over 800 miles from Chicago in the autumn of 1885, fleeing a life she could no longer bear, with only $23 to her name and a desperate hope for a fresh start in Montana territory. Her husband's death in a factory accident had left her penniless, and her in-laws' subsequent attempts to take her child had driven her west on a cousin's vague invitation. "Hello? Anyone still here?" she called out, her voice barely audible over Emma's fussing. The station appeared abandoned, save for the small office at the far end, where a dim light still burned. An older man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the office, keys jangling in his hand. "Station's closing, madam. Last coach left an hour ago." Rose swallowed hard. "My cousin was supposed to meet me. Rebecca Miller from Silver Creek?" The station master's expression softened with pity. "Silver Creek's near 30 miles north. No coaches heading that way till morning." He glanced at the baby, whose whimpers were growing louder. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" The question hung in the air as Rose realized the full extent of her predicament. She shook her head, unable to trust her voice. The station master sighed. "Can't leave the station open, rules are rules, but—" He hesitated before pointing to a sheltered corner of the platform near some freight. "That's out of the wind at least. I got an empty crate with some clean packing straw meant for the general store. Might make a decent cradle for the little one." It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you," Rose whispered, following him to where several wooden crates were stacked against the wall. He emptied one of its contents, leaving only the clean straw packing, and placed it in the corner, most protected from the elements. "It ain't much," he said apologetically, "but it's the best I can do. I'd offer my home, but the wife's down with fever, and I can't risk bringing a baby around that." "You're very kind," Rose managed, settling Emma into the makeshift bed. The baby, exhausted from the journey, quickly settled into the surprisingly comfortable nest. "Train comes through at dawn," the station master said, tipping his hat. "God be with you, madam." With that, he disappeared down the path leading to town, leaving Rose alone with her sleeping child and the vast Montana night. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped rapidly. Rose wrapped her thin shawl tighter around herself and sat beside the crate, keeping one hand inside to rest on Emma's chest, feeling the reassuring rise and fall of her daughter's breathing. The platform was hard and cold beneath her, but she dared not sleep for fear of what or who might approach in the darkness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her thoughts. A rider was approaching the station, his silhouette gradually materializing from the darkness. Rose tensed, drawing herself up protectively beside Emma's makeshift crib. The horse came to a stop at the edge of the platform, and its rider dismounted with the easy grace of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Station's closed for the night." "I know," Rose replied, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "We're waiting for morning." The man stepped closer, and in the faint moonlight, Rose could make out his features, a strong jaw with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He was dressed like a cowboy, with worn leather chaps over his jeans, a dusty denim jacket, and a bandana loose around his neck. "You planning on staying out here all night?" he asked, glancing at the sleeping baby in the crate. "That ain't safe nor proper." Rose lifted her chin. "We have nowhere else to go." The man was quiet for a moment, then removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell just above his collar. "Name's Ryder Lawson. I run cattle about 10 miles east of here." He gestured toward the town. "There's a boarding house in Pine Ridge." "I have limited funds," Rose admitted reluctantly. "I need to save enough for a coach to Silver Creek tomorrow." Ryder studied her for a long moment. "Silver Creek, you say? I'm heading that direction tomorrow myself." He glanced again at Emma, sleeping peacefully in the crate. "I can't in good conscience leave a woman and child out here alone all night." Rose stiffened. "We'll be fine, Mr. Lawson. I appreciate your concern. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Didn't suggest otherwise, but I'll sit with you till sunrise, if you don't mind the company. Wouldn't be right to ride off. Before Rose could protest, Ryder retrieved a bedroll from his horse, spread it on the platform beside her, and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small tin of coffee, a pot, and some beef jerky. Got any objection to a small fire? He asked, nodding toward a clear patch of dirt just off the platform. Night's only getting colder. Rose hesitated, then nodded gratefully. That would be very welcome. With practiced efficiency, Ryder gathered some kindling and built a small, controlled fire. Soon the comforting aroma of coffee filled the air, pushing back the bite of the cold night. "Cup of coffee for you," he said, offering her a battered tin mug. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." Rose accepted it with both hands, savoring the warmth. "Thank you. I'm Rose Nowak, and that's my daughter, Emma." "Beautiful name," he commented, glancing at the sleeping baby. "How old?" 6 months, Rose answered, taking a careful sip of the strong coffee. "She's been remarkably good, considering everything." "And what brings you to Montana territory, Mrs. Nowak?" Ryder asked, settling back against one of the posts supporting the platform roof. Rose hesitated. "I'm a widow," she said finally. "My husband died 3 months ago in a factory accident. I'm starting over." Ryder nodded, not pressing for more details. "Montana's a good place for that. Hard country, but honest." He offered her some jerky, which she accepted gratefully. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. Emma stirred once, and Rose immediately leaned over to soothe her, humming softly until the baby settled again. "You have a way with her," Ryder observed. Rose smiled despite herself. "She's all I have." As the night deepened, Ryder told her about his ranch, modest by Montana standards, he said, with about 200 head of cattle and some decent grazing land with a creek running through it. He'd come to Montana 10 years earlier, as a young man of 20, working as a ranch hand until he'd saved enough to buy his own place 3 years ago. "It's not much," he said, "but it's mine. Built the cabin myself." "That sounds wonderful," Rose said sincerely. "To have something that's truly yours." "And you?" Ryder asked. "What awaits you in Silver Creek?" Rose's expression faltered. "My cousin Rebecca. She wrote that I could stay with her family while I look for work. I have some experience as a seamstress." Ryder nodded, adding more wood to the fire. "Silver Creek's growing. New hotel just went up last year. Might be opportunities there." The night wore on, and Rose found herself sharing more than she'd intended about growing up in Pennsylvania, moving to Chicago when she married Thomas, the difficult years in the city, and finally, the devastating accident that had taken her husband's life. "His family blamed me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "They said if I'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have been working double shifts. They tried to take Emma from me. Said I couldn't provide for her." She looked up, a flash of determination in her eyes. "I couldn't let that happen." "No," Ryder agreed quietly. "A child belongs with its mother." The way he said it made Rose wonder if there was a story behind his words, but she didn't ask. They'd already shared more than strangers typically would, brought together by the unusual circumstances. As the hours passed, Rose felt herself growing drowsy, the long journey catching up with her. Ryder noticed her head nodding. "Get some rest, Mrs. Nowak," he said gently. "I'll keep watch over you both." Under normal circumstances, Rose would never have considered sleeping in the presence of a man she'd just met, but exhaustion overruled caution. "Thank you," she murmured, arranging her small traveling bag as a pillow. "Wake me if Emma stirs." "You have my word," Ryder promised. Rose drifted into an uneasy sleep, waking occasionally to check on Emma. Each time she found Ryder alert and vigilant, sometimes adding wood to the fire, sometimes just sitting quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness surrounding them. Once, she woke to find he had draped his own coat over her while she slept. Near dawn, Emma began to fuss. Rose immediately sat up to tend to her, cradling the baby against her chest. "She's hungry," Rose explained as she discreetly adjusted her clothing to nurse the baby. Ryder respectfully turned away, busying himself with preparing more coffee. "Sun will be up soon," he observed. First train comes through around 7, if I recall correctly. Rose nodded, looking down at Emma's face as she nursed. I don't know how to thank you for staying with us, Mr. Lawson. Ryder, please, he said, still keeping his back turned. And there's no need for thanks. Couldn't call myself a man if I'd ridden off and left you here alone. When Emma had finished nursing and was contentedly cooing in Rose's arms, Ryder turned back around, offering Rose another cup of coffee. I've been thinking, he said, his expression thoughtful. Silver Creek's not far from my property. I could take you there today, save you the coach fare. Rose hesitated. That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. No imposition, Ryder interrupted. I'd be heading that way regardless. Got business with the mercantile. He paused. My wagon's in town. More comfortable for you and the little one than riding double on horseback. The offer was tempting. The money saved on coach fare would give Rose a small cushion until she found work. Still, she was wary of accepting too much help from a stranger, even one who had proven himself trustworthy through the night. I wouldn't want to delay your business, she said carefully. Ryder shrugged. Been delayed by worse things than helping a lady and her child. His eyes met hers, direct and honest. I understand your caution, Mrs. Nowak. You don't know me, but I give you my word as a gentleman. You'll be safe with me. Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Lawson Ryder. And please, call me Rose. The sun was just breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of gold and pink. In the growing light, Rose could see Ryder more clearly, his face weathered from years in the sun and wind, but handsome, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than not. His eyes, she now saw, were a deep blue, like the Montana sky. The station master arrived as they were packing up their small camp, surprise evident on his face at finding Rose not alone. Morning, Jim, Ryder greeted him. Hope you don't mind I kept this lady and her baby company through the night. Course not, Jim replied, eyeing Ryder with obvious approval. Glad to see someone had the decency to help out. He turned to Rose. You heading into town for the coach, madam? Before Rose could answer, Ryder spoke up. Mrs. Nowak and her daughter will be traveling with me to Silver Creek. She's got family there. Jim nodded, clearly relieved. That's good news. He looked at Rose. Mr. Lawson here's one of the good ones. Known him since he was just a ranch hand with big dreams. Rose smiled. He's been very kind. Within the hour, Ryder had retrieved his wagon from town and loaded Rose's single trunk and small bag. He had also stopped at the general store as soon as it opened and purchased several supplies blankets, some canned goods, a loaf of fresh bread, and, to Rose's surprise, a small wooden rattle for Emma. The journey takes most of a day, he explained as he helped Rose into the wagon seat, Emma secure in her arms. Thought the little one might like something to play with. The simple kindness nearly brought tears to Rose's eyes. Thank you, she said, watching as Emma immediately grabbed for the smooth wooden toy. They set out as the town was coming to life, the main street beginning to fill with people starting their day. Rose felt a mix of relief and trepidation as Pine Ridge faded behind them. Relief to be moving toward her destination, with her daughter safe and warm, but uncertainty about what awaited them in Silver Creek. The day was clear and cool, the road winding through breathtaking country, vast valleys flanked by distant mountains, herds of cattle dotting the landscape, and occasionally the silhouette of a ranch house or barn breaking the horizon. Ryder proved to be good company, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his early days in the territory. He was easy to talk to, never pressing when Rose fell silent, and showing genuine interest when she did speak. They stopped at midday beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat a simple meal. Rose spread a blanket on the grass for Emma, who was delighted to be able to kick and squirm freely after being held for so long. She's strong, Ryder observed, watching as Emma pushed herself up on her arms, her face determined. Got a spirit to her. Like her father, Rose said softly. He was stubborn as the day is long. Ryder smiled. Good quality in this country. Takes grit to make it out here. He hesitated before asking, What kind of work did your husband do? He worked in a steel mill, Rose answered, her expression clouding. Dangerous work, but it paid better than most. He was saving to open his own blacksmith shop someday. She sighed. He never got the chance. I'm sorry, Ryder said simply, and Rose appreciated that he didn't offer platitudes. As they continued their journey, Rose found herself studying Ryder when he wasn't looking the confident way he handled the reins, the gentle manner in which he spoke to the horses, the quiet strength evident in his bearing. He wasn't like any man she'd met before, certainly nothing like the rough factory workers of Chicago or the calculating businessmen who'd employed her husband. By late afternoon, Emma had grown fussy, overwhelmed by the long day of travel. Rose tried to soothe her, but the baby's cries grew more insistent. "We should stop for a bit," Ryder suggested, guiding the wagon toward a grove of trees. "Let you both stretch your legs proper." He helped Rose down from the wagon, then discreetly busied himself with the horses while she nursed Emma. The baby calmed immediately, her little hand resting against Rose's chest as she fed. "She's a good baby," Ryder commented when Rose had finished and rejoined him, Emma now sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "Yes, she is," Rose agreed, stroking her daughter's fine hair. "Though I worry about her, growing up without a father." Ryder was quiet for a moment. "My pa died when I was 8, he finally said. "Ma raised me and my 2 sisters on her own. She was the strongest person I ever knew." He met Rose's gaze. "Children need love more than anything else. Seems to me Emma has that in abundance." His words warmed something inside Rose that had been cold for a long time. "Thank you for saying that." The sun was beginning to set when Ryder pointed out a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Silver Creek," he announced, "should be there within the hour." Rose felt a knot form in her stomach. What if Rebecca wasn't expecting her? What if there was no place for them after all? As if sensing her thoughts, Ryder said quietly, "Where does your cousin live?" "She wrote that they have a house on Pine Street," Rose replied. "Her husband works at the lumber mill." Ryder nodded. "I know where that is. Pine Street's on the north side of town." As they drew closer to Silver Creek, Rose could see it was indeed growing, with several new buildings under construction. The main street bustled with activity, even as evening approached, miners, cowboys, and townspeople going about their business. Wagons loading and unloading at the general store, music drifting from the saloon. Ryder guided the wagon through town toward Pine Street, which turned out to be a modest row of small houses, most with vegetable gardens and clothes hanging on lines in the yards. Rose scanned each house anxiously, looking for any sign of her cousin. "Do you know which house is hers?" Ryder asked as they moved slowly down the street. Rose shook her head. "She didn't specify. I assumed she'd meet me at the station in Pine Ridge." They reached the end of the street without spotting anyone who might be Rebecca. Rose's heart sank as Ryder turned the wagon around and headed back, this time stopping at each house to inquire after Rebecca Miller. At the 4th house, a tired-looking woman with 3 small children clinging to her skirts gave them the news that chilled Rose's blood. "The Millers? They moved on about a month ago," the woman said, bouncing a fussy toddler on her hip. "Tom got work with a logging outfit up north, near the Canadian border, sold this place to the Jacksons, who just moved in last week." Rose felt the world tilting beneath her. "They're gone?" she whispered. Emma, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. "'Fraid so," the woman confirmed. "Left in quite a hurry, from what I hear." Ryder thanked the woman and guided a stunned Rose back to the wagon. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Did your cousin know you were coming?" "I wrote to her," Rose said, her voice hollow. "Told her when to expect us, but the letter, it might not have reached her before they left." The full weight of her situation crashed down on her. She was in a strange town with a baby, limited funds, and nowhere to go. Again. Ryder was quiet for a moment, then said decisively, "There's a decent hotel in town. Let me get you and Emma settled there tonight." "I can't accept," Rose began, but Ryder cut her off gently. "You can, and you will," he said firmly. "Just for tonight. Then tomorrow we can figure things out in the light of day." Too exhausted and overwhelmed to argue, Rose nodded, clutching Emma closer as Ryder turned the wagon toward the town center. The Silver Creek Hotel was a new 3-story building with a freshly painted sign. Ryder helped Rose down from the wagon, carried her trunk inside, and spoke quietly with the clerk while Rose sat in a chair by the fire, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "You're all set," Ryder said, returning with a key. "Room 204, upstairs. It's clean and comfortable." He hesitated. I took the liberty of paying for 3 nights. Gives you time to look for work and more permanent lodgings. Rose stared at him. Mr. Lawson, I can't possibly accept such charity. It's not charity, Ryder interrupted. Consider it a loan, if you must. You can repay me when you're settled. His expression softened. Please, Rose, for Emma's sake, if not your own. At the mention of her daughter, Rose relented. As a loan, then, she agreed, though the prospect of finding work and housing quickly enough to repay him seemed daunting. Ryder carried her trunk upstairs to a small but clean room with a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. He set her things down and stood awkwardly for a moment. I'll come by tomorrow morning, he said. There's a restaurant downstairs that serves a good breakfast. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch, placing it on the dresser. This should help until you find work. Before Rose could protest again, he continued. I know your pride's suffering, Mrs. Nowak, but sometimes we all need a helping hand. I've needed one myself more than once. Rose looked at him, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd experienced in months. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know what we would have done without your help. Ryder smiled, touching the brim of his hat. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a better day. With that, he left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Rose sat on the edge of the bed, Emma now awake and looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. Well, little one, she whispered, it seems our fresh start isn't quite what we planned. The next morning, Rose awoke to a soft knock at her door. She'd slept deeply, the comfortable bed a luxury after the long journey and night at the station. Emma was still sleeping, curled up beside her. Rose opened the door to find Ryder standing there, hat in hand, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. Morning, he said. Hope I didn't wake you too early. Not at all, Rose replied, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. Give me a moment to freshen up? Ryder nodded. I'll wait downstairs. 15 minutes later, Rose descended the stairs with Emma in her arms, both of them as presentable as she could manage with her limited possessions. Ryder stood as they approached his table in the small restaurant. You look rested, he commented, pulling out a chair for her. How's the little one this morning? Much happier after a good night's sleep, Rose replied, settling Emma on her lap. The baby immediately reached for Ryder's coffee cup, making him chuckle. Adventurous, isn't she? He said, moving the cup out of reach and offering Emma the wooden rattle instead. Over breakfast, Ryder outlined a plan. I spoke with Mrs. Harrison, who runs the hotel. She mentioned the new dressmaker on Main Street is looking for an experienced seamstress. Given your skills, it seemed worth investigating. Rose felt a flutter of hope. That would be perfect. And, Ryder continued, there's a widow named Mrs. Pearson who rents rooms in her house to respectable ladies. She has a son away at school back east, so his room is available. The rent's reasonable, and she's known to be kind to children. Rose set down her fork, studying him. You've done all this research in just a morning? Ryder shrugged, a faint color rising in his cheeks. Small towns run on information. Ask the right people. You can learn everything you need in one conversation. He hesitated. I hope I haven't overstepped. No, Rose assured him quickly. I'm grateful, truly. She looked down at Emma, who was contentedly gumming a piece of bread. It seems we might find our place here after all. After breakfast, Ryder escorted Rose to Madame Beaumont's dressmaking shop, a tidy establishment with elegant dresses displayed in the window. Rose was immediately struck by the quality of the work. These were garments that would have been at home in the finest Chicago shops. Madame Beaumont herself proved to be not French at all, but a practical woman from Vermont named Sarah Beaumont, who had adopted the Madame to give her business an air of sophistication. She warmed to Rose immediately upon learning of her experience as a seamstress in Chicago. Skilled hands are hard to find in these parts, she said, examining a sample of Rose's stitching that she fortunately had in her bag. Most girls here can mend a shirt, but fine dressmaking is another matter entirely. By the time they left the shop, Rose had secured a position starting the following Monday, with wages that, while modest, would cover her basic needs and allow her to save a little. Their next stop was the home of Mrs. Pearson, a stately woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. She showed Rose a small but pleasant room at the back of her house, overlooking a garden. My son's at college in Boston, she explained. Room's just sitting empty, gathering dust. She glanced at Emma, who was fascinated by the colorful quilt on the bed. I don't mind children, so long as they're well behaved, and this one seems sweet as sugar. The rent was fair, and Mrs. Pearson even offered to watch Emma during Rose's working hours for a small additional fee. Been missing having young ones around, she admitted. House gets quiet when they grow up and leave. By mid-afternoon, Rose had secured both employment and housing, achievements that seemed impossible just a day earlier. As they walked back toward the hotel, Emma drowsy in Rose's arms after the exciting day, Rose turned to Ryder. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. You've done so much for us, and we're nothing to you. Ryder stopped walking, turning to face her. That's not true, he said, his voice low and serious. From the moment I saw you at that station, sitting beside that crate with your baby, you weren't nothing. You were someone who needed help, and I was someone who could provide it. Rose felt tears prickling behind her eyes. Still, most men wouldn't have bothered. I'm not most men, Ryder said simply. Then, with a slight smile, he added, Besides, I find myself reluctant to say goodbye. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and weighty with implication. Rose felt her heart quicken. You're returning to your ranch? She asked, already knowing the answer. Ryder nodded. I should head back tomorrow. Got cattle that need tending, and my foreman's probably wondering if I fell off a cliff somewhere. Of course, Rose said, trying to hide her disappointment. You have responsibilities. They continued walking, a new tension between them that hadn't been there before. At the hotel entrance, Ryder cleared his throat. Silver Creek's not far from my land, he said carefully. I come to town every couple of weeks for supplies. Perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, I could call on you when I'm here. Rose looked up at him, this man who had quite literally sat beside her until sunrise, who had helped her when she had nothing to offer in return. I would like that very much, she said softly. Ryder's face brightened. Good, that's good. He touched the brim of his hat. I should let you and Emma get some rest. Been a long day. Rose nodded, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye, even temporarily. Will I see you before you leave tomorrow? Count on it, Ryder promised. I'll come by in the morning. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Rose reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just 2 days. From desperation on a cold station platform to the beginnings of a new life, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had chosen to sit with her through the night. Emma slept peacefully in the middle of the bed, her tiny fists occasionally twitching as she dreamed. Rose gently stroked her daughter's cheek, whispering, We're going to be all right, little one, I promise. True to his word, Ryder appeared the next morning as Rose was finishing her breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Emma squealed with delight when she saw him, reaching out her arms in a gesture that surprised both adults. Well now, Ryder said, clearly pleased as he took the baby from Rose. Seems I've made a friend. She's usually shy with strangers, Rose remarked, watching as Emma patted Ryder's face with her tiny hands. You must have a way with children. Never spent much time around them, Ryder admitted, letting Emma grab his finger. But this one's special. The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly, touched Rose deeply. Yes, she is. Ryder had come to say goodbye, but the parting stretched into a long walk through town, with Ryder pointing out places Rose might find useful. The best bakery, the church where most families gathered on Sundays, the small library maintained by the schoolteacher's wife. Silver Creek's growing, he told her as they walked. Good people here, for the most part. Town's got aspirations to become something more than just a stopping place. It feels welcoming, Rose said, and meant it. Already several shopkeepers had nodded to her as they passed, and a group of women leaving the church had smiled warmly at Emma. All too soon, they found themselves back at the hotel, the moment of parting unavoidable. I should be on my way, Ryder said reluctantly, handing Emma back to Rose. Got a long ride ahead? Rose nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course. Thank you again for everything. Ryder hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. My ranch, he said, handing it to her. In case you ever need anything, or just Want to write?" Rose accepted it, touched by the gesture. "I will." There was an awkward moment where neither seemed to know what to say next. Finally, Ryder cleared his throat. "I'll be back in town in 2 weeks, cattle sale at the North End." "We'll be here," Rose assured him, surprised by how much she meant it. Ryder smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Take care of yourself, Rose Nowak. And that little one, too." With that, he touched his hat brim, turned, and walked away toward the livery where his wagon waited. Rose watched him go, Emma babbling quietly in her arms, and felt both sadness and a strange, tentative hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rose settled into her new life. Madame Beaumont proved to be a fair employer who genuinely appreciated Rose's skills, often leaving the more intricate work to her while handling the customer-facing aspects of the business. Mrs. Pearson doted on Emma, proving to be a loving caretaker during Rose's working hours. And slowly, Rose began to form connections with other townspeople, the baker who slipped her day-old bread at reduced prices, the school teacher who invited her to join the ladies' reading circle, the young doctor who checked Emma over free of charge just to be sure she's thriving. Yet despite these new relationships, Rose found herself watching the road from town, anticipating Ryder's return with an eagerness that both surprised and concerned her. Was it wise to feel such attachment to a man she barely knew? The morning of the cattle sale dawned clear and cool. Rose dressed with extra care, selecting her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style that took longer than her usual practical bun. Mrs. Pearson noticed immediately. "My, don't you look lovely today?" she commented as Rose dropped Emma off. "Any special occasion?" Rose felt her cheeks warm. "No, I just felt like making an effort." Mrs. Pearson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "That nice rancher's due back in town today, isn't he, Mr. Lawson?" "Is he?" Rose replied, trying for nonchalance and failing miserably. Mrs. Pearson laughed softly. "It's good to see you taking an interest, dear. You're young, and life's meant to be lived. That husband of yours wouldn't want you mourning forever." The words stayed with Rose as she walked to work, making her wonder if perhaps the older woman was right. Thomas had loved life so fiercely, would he really want her to close her heart to possibilities? Throughout the morning, Rose found herself glancing out the shop window whenever hoofbeats passed by. Madame Beaumont finally shooed her to the back room. "You're pricking your fingers, not the fabric," she scolded good-naturedly. "Whatever's distracting you, best to deal with it after working hours." Rose applied herself to her sewing, but her thoughts kept drifting to Ryder, his kind eyes, his gentle hands with Emma, the way he'd sat beside them through that long night at the depot. She was just closing up shop in the late afternoon when the bell over the door jingled. Looking up, her heart leapt at the sight of Ryder standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place among the feminine surroundings of the dress shop. "Mr. Lawson?" she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Mrs. Nowak," he returned, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I was just finishing up." Rose busied herself with the latch on the register, suddenly nervous under his gaze. "You look well," Ryder observed. "Settling in all right?" Rose nodded. "Very well. Everyone's been kind." She gestured to the shop around them. "Madame Beaumont's pleased with my work, and Mrs. Pearson dotes on Emma as if she were her own grandchild." "I'm glad to hear it." Ryder stepped closer, setting his hat on the counter between them. "I was hoping, that is, I wondered if you and Emma might join me for supper at the hotel." The invitation sent a flutter through Rose's stomach. "We'd like that very much." The evening that followed was unlike any Rose had experienced since Thomas's death. They retrieved Emma from Mrs. Pearson, then enjoyed a leisurely meal in the hotel restaurant, where Ryder entertained the baby with silly faces that had her giggling uncontrollably. They talked easily, sharing stories of their days apart, and Rose was struck by how natural it felt, as if they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. After dinner, they walked through town as twilight settled, Emma falling asleep against Ryder's shoulder as he carried her. The trust her daughter showed in this man touched Rose deeply. "She likes you," Rose observed as they approached Mrs. Pearson's house. Ryder looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, a tender expression crossing his face. "She's easy to like." At Mrs. Pearson's door, Rose hesitated. Would you like to come in for coffee? Mrs. Pearson wouldn't mind. Ryder shook his head reluctantly. Better not. Early start tomorrow. He carefully transferred the sleeping Emma to Rose's arms. But I'd like to call on you again, if that's acceptable. I'll be in town for 3 days. I'd like that, Rose said softly. Ryder's gaze held hers for a long moment. You know, when I first saw you at that station, sitting beside that crate with your baby inside, he paused, seeming to search for words. I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Still do. The simple, sincere compliment warmed Rose from within. I was terrified, she admitted. That's what makes it brave, Ryder said quietly. Doing what needs doing, even when you're afraid. Impulsively, Rose reached out and touched his hand. Thank you, not just for the words, but for everything. Ryder turned his hand over, his fingers briefly closing around hers. Good night, Rose, he said, his voice low. I'll see you tomorrow. The next 3 days established a pattern that would continue over the following months. Whenever Ryder came to town, usually every 2 weeks, sometimes longer, if ranch work demanded it, he would spend as much time as possible with Rose and Emma. They would share meals, take walks, and sometimes simply sit on Mrs. Pearson's porch, talking as the sun set and Emma played at their feet. Slowly, cautiously, their relationship deepened. Ryder was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or pushing beyond what Rose was comfortable with. He seemed content with her companionship, with watching Emma grow and change, with sharing the everyday moments that made up their lives. As autumn turned to winter, Rose found her feelings for Ryder growing stronger. He was unlike any man she'd known, steady, honest, and kind, in a way that never called attention to itself. She began to realize that what had started as gratitude had blossomed into something much more profound. Winter in Montana was harsh, and there were weeks when the snow made travel between Silver Creek and Ryder's ranch impossible. During these separations, letters became their lifeline. Rose discovered that Ryder, though not formally educated beyond basic schooling, had a gift for expressing himself on paper. His letters were filled with vivid descriptions of life on the ranch, thoughtful reflections on books he was reading during the long evenings, and increasingly, tender words about how much he missed her and Emma. In one particularly heartfelt letter in January, he wrote, I find myself listening for Emma's laugh when I'm doing the most ordinary tasks. And in the evenings when the ranch is quiet, I think of you, Rose, and wonder if you're looking at the same stars I am. It's a strange thing to miss people who weren't in my life just months ago, yet now I can't imagine a future without you both in it. Rose read those words over and over, holding them close to her heart. She had not expected to find love again, had come to Montana seeking only safety and a chance to rebuild her life for Emma's sake. Yet here it was, unlooked for but undeniable. By early spring, when the snow began to melt and the roads cleared, Ryder's visits resumed with new frequency. One beautiful April afternoon, he arrived unexpectedly at Mrs. Pearson's with a small wagon. Thought you and Emma might like to see the ranch, he suggested, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Rose found endearing. It's a fine day for a drive, and I've got a picnic packed. The ranch was everything Ryder had described, modest but thriving, with a solid cabin nestled in a valley protected by hills on 3 sides. A creek ran through the property, and wildflowers were beginning to dot the meadows. Rose could see why he loved it so much. After showing them around the main buildings and introducing them to his small crew, Ryder took them to a spot by the creek where a massive old cottonwood provided shade. There they spread a blanket and enjoyed the simple meal he had prepared. Emma, now nearly a year old and taking her first tentative steps. Delighted in the new environment, toddling a few steps before falling on the soft grass, then pushing herself up to try again. She's determined, Ryder observed, watching her with unmistakable affection. Like her mother, Rose smiled, then added softly, and like someone else I know. Ryder met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. He reached out, taking her hand in his. Rose, I've been wanting to ask you something. Rose's heart quickened. Yes. These past months, getting to know you and Emma, they've been the happiest of my life. His voice was steady, but Rose could see the emotion in his eyes. I know it might seem fast, and if you need more time, I understand completely. But I want you to know that I love you both, and if you consider it, I'd be honored to make a life with you, here or in Silver Creek, or wherever you'd be happiest. The declaration, though not entirely unexpected, still took Rose's breath away. Are you proposing? Ryder nodded, his expression serious. I am. I want to be a husband to you, Rose, and a father to Emma, if you'll have me. Rose looked at him, this good, honorable man who had sat beside her and her baby through that cold night, who had helped them build a new life, who had given them time and space to heal while steadfastly remaining present. She thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, and knew with certainty that he would approve of Ryder, would want this second chance at happiness for her and their daughter. Yes, she said simply, her voice clear and sure. Yes, I'll marry you, Ryder. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward, hesitated briefly, then kissed her a gentle, reverent kiss that held both passion and promise. A squeal from Emma broke the moment, and they turned to see her standing unassisted, clapping her hands in apparent approval. Ryder laughed, reaching out to swing the baby into his arms. I think that's a yes from both of you, he said, his eyes shining with emotion. 3 months later, on a perfect summer morning, Rose Nowak became Rose Lawson in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Emma, dressed in a tiny white dress that Rose had sewn herself, was passed from Mrs. Pearson to Madame Beaumont, to the pastor's wife during the service. Everyone eager to hold the child who had, along with her mother, become beloved members of the community. As they exchanged vows, Rose thought back to that night at the Pine Ridge station, how desperate and alone she had felt, how uncertain the future had seemed. She could never have imagined then that the tall cowboy who appeared out of the darkness would become her husband, that the makeshift cradle in a wooden crate would lead to a home filled with love. After the ceremony, as guests gathered at the hotel for the celebration, Ryder pulled Rose aside for a quiet moment. Happy? He asked, his arms around her waist. Rose looked up at him, this man who had changed everything. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. You know, Ryder said, his voice soft with emotion, that night at the depot, when I saw you sitting beside that crate with Emma sleeping inside, something told me my life was about to change forever. He touched her cheek gently. Best decision I ever made, sitting down beside you two till sunrise. Rose leaned into his touch, her heart full. For me too, she whispered. For me too. And later that night, as they settled into their new home at the ranch, Emma sleeping peacefully in the nursery Ryder had built himself, Rose knew with absolute certainty that this was where they belonged, not in a wooden crate at a depot, not alone on a cold platform, but here, together, with sunrise no longer something to merely wait for, but something to embrace with hope and joy.